Thank you for joining us today. This is the third conversation in the framework of our project. It's called, the conversation is called Reparative Explorations, Feminist Pathways, and it is the third in the series of online conversation devoted to the quest for cultural responses that can work to repair the political and ecological crisis of today. With me today are three researchers from three different teams, so research teams that are part of our project, the Repair project or the TEST-G project, which is co-financed by the European Union. It's part of the Creative Europe, and we are just initiating it. So with me today are Nina Gojić, Tjaša Črnigoj, and Pola Salicka. And today I imagine that we're going to open some topics of how we work in our fields. But before we do that, let me maybe just do a short introduction of all of the participants, but just shortly, because I'm sure that during our conversation more will be unwrapped. So Nina Gojić is a dramaturg based in Zagreb and is working mostly in the field of contemporary dance and devised theater, and also writes for theater and for performance and about theater and performance. Pola Salicka is a designer and cultural producer, and she says about herself that she's interested in radical ecological thinking and politics of care, also in our social relationships, and is also part of Zakole group. Maybe she will explain more about this group later. And finally, Tjaša Črnigoj, who is a theater director and is now mostly interested in documentary theater. She recently directed a play called Babice or Grannies, and now she's also doing a project at our organization, Maska, Ljubljana, which is exploring the topic of sexual pleasure as a human right, called sexual education too. Maybe just to say a thing or two more about this project. So the project is called Testing Ground, Reparative Practices for New Cultural Ecosystems, and is conducted by Kurziv, Krytyka, Polityczna, and Maska, Ljubljana. And it's dealing mostly with the topic of repair. Repair is, as maybe you have followed in the previous conversations, something that we're researching. So we're finding out how does the culture field respond reparatively to the crisis of today. And sorry, reparative practices or reparative criticism or reparative methodologies are something that we are researching together and finding some answers how we want to address the crisis in the cultural field, be it political or ecological crisis. And for today, I suggested that we talk about feminist pathways as such reparative practices or reparative methodologies. I suggested feminist pathways, or the ways we do art differently, or the ways we do we do things in the cultural field differently through feminism, or through the endeavors that the different feminism maybe have already came up with. So the main question for me today would be, did maybe feminism already offer a toolbox, maybe for a toolbox for changing what we don't like, or the things that we don't like, how we work and how we are together. So I'm really happy that we're going to be dealing with these topics, and some of the guests are dealing with the topic of feminism more literally, such as Tjaša Črnigoj, who is exploring sexual pleasure as a topic in her performances. But maybe other two participants are also very much, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are also very much dealing with feminism, but more in the ways that they are doing their work in the cultural field. So maybe this is the frame, and before I open up for you three, I would just like to maybe explain a bit more why there is a notion of ethics of care also in the description of this event. I propose that ethics of care is a sort of a notion that derives from feminist thought, because it stands for maybe doing things more relationally, doing things and coming up with decisions more relationally. I'm not as, I mean, this autonomous subject that is a world enrolled in itself, in himself, but that things are done more relationally. But of course, I don't think that care is something that is essentially essential to women. But I figure that feminists see that the care is something that can't be banned, and we all need care for our well-being. So the question is more how to distribute care justly. And of course, care itself has a lot of problems also in feminism, because with care, we're always already enrolled in different power relations. So maybe we can address all that, but I don't know, maybe we start firstly with Nina Gojić. I would like to ask you, because you are doing a lot of work in the cultural field, dramaturgical work, which is actually, I guess, I mean, it's kind of really care work. It's somewhere, I mean, behind the scenes mostly, but I would call it also care work, care labor maybe. And I would like to ask you, because working in art seems a very liberal thing, something where we can set the working conditions for ourselves, but maybe it's not so. Or how would you explain that?
Thanks, Pia, for this introduction. I think, yeah, of course, the work of the dramaturg, I agree, a lot of it is about caring for not only people, but many elements of work. Yeah, maybe the thing that I'm very interested in the context of cultural labor is if we are able to be unalienated from the results of our labor. And maybe I can just briefly mention the findings of research I have conducted with artist and activist Selma Banić, which was in 2017, and it was called How Do Female Artists Live? And this research showed that earnings from working in culture are not enough to sustain basic needs for a big majority of our respondents, as well as other crushing statistics that prove the impossibility to live just from cultural work in this specific context. So this led me somehow to conclude that that working in the field of culture is really a privilege, since research showed that for most people it's possible because they have some other form of economic stability, like housing, partner's income, family heritage, and other things they can rely on, that makes it possible to make the choice to still work in culture despite these insufficiencies. But maybe another privilege in working in culture is that I believe that we are able to try out different worlds as part of our work. Of course, depending on the context. Maybe in the context of Croatia, where I come from, where there is a really strict division between institutional and non-institutional scenes, these things are, of course, much more possible in the frame of the independent, so-called independent scene, where the majority of my work happens. While experiments with making big differences in how institutions work have failed in recent Croatian history, most notably in the example of director Oliver Frljić, who tried to do something new, and he couldn't because of the just because how the system of institution works. But what interests me in my work is really how we can choose models of work that experiment with different social environments that we can formulate and rehearse ourselves, and how we can choose to work with different imaginings of what is possible in this world, or ideally both. Maybe I would start with that now and see where it leads us.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I would now ask Tjaša Črnigoj, because you worked a lot also in the institutional scene and now more on the independent scene. And maybe are there differences between the working conditions, and can you maybe now working more on the independent scene create your own working conditions, and how do you do that?
Thank you so much for having me first, and hello to everybody. Yes, I mean, I haven't worked. This is my feeling, that I haven't worked so much on the institutional scene, but I could say that the main difference is definitely that. As a director, I have much more freedom, like making a team, because in institutions you have ensembles of actors. In independent scene, you don't. You somehow form your own team from scratch, and this is a completely different starting point, and also, yeah, I feel like there is more flexibility in a sense of the duration of the process. I feel like also there is much more freedom in a sense of making devised theater. It's much more challenging to and much more unconventional to how do you say, to create conditions to make devised theater in the institutional scene. But yeah, I mean, of course, there's the financial part is a bit the other way around. It's less finances in the independent scene. So as far as creating your own conditions or my own conditions, I would say that what is important for me is to somehow create the team of performers, and this is how we are working in this project, Sex Education 2. A group of performers that are somehow, interested in doing research, also in the field, interviewing people. We are doing documentary. We are working in the practice of documentary theater. So for me, it was important to invite performers that are also interested in doing research interviews, who are also interested in making their own materials and stand and somehow work with their bodies and stand on the stage as artists and creators of not just their part, but somehow of being the co-creators of the whole of the concept and so on. So yeah, this is something that is very important, and that is I can't imagine like doing this kind of project. Also the duration of the project, which is again in the case of Sex Education 2, it's a very long project. It's lasting more than 1 year, and it's it's really important that the setting it is as it is, that it's happening at Nova Pošta, and it's hard for me to imagine it like in a strictly institutional environment.
Okay, maybe we'll get back to that a little bit later. Now a question also for Pola Salicka. Maybe because you're not, you're also dealing not with only interhuman relationship in your work, but also the materiality of things, and with more than human participants. Maybe I would like to ask you, how do you understand the concept of care in your work?
Mm-hmm. Hello everyone, and thanks as well for having me here. So maybe just a word of introduction to the things I'm working with, or we are working with, because I'm part of a group, Zakola, that works in and with a wetland in Warsaw, which is like an urban wetland. So as you have mentioned, it is an ecosystem full of other beings, full of more than human life, that we are trying to understand since a few years, and also bring a bit to the people, in a sense of kind of developing some sort of sensitivity to this kind of places, and in that sense, I think all the let's say methods that we've been developing come from the place itself. So we see ourselves as guests in this wetland, and therefore we are trying to to always be mindful and careful about what we are doing, about the beings we are working with. So it also requires to put a sign of equality between us and other beings, as well as all kind of actors kind of in the picture. So also humans, neighbors, and any kind of like participants of this story, this narrative. So therefore, I would say, especially at the beginning, we were, we were very, very careful about how to behave in this ecosystem. Are we not kind of destroying something? What is the line that we are not crossing? What are the needs of the inhabitants, so to say? And also, I think what comes with it is that we are not, let's say, putting ourselves above. So we are trying to blur this divide between subject and object of research or observation of any kind of meeting, let's say. So trying to not engage with this non-human world in an oppressive, patronizing manner from above. So I would say we actually see ourselves as a bit like caretakers of the space, though it's not. I mean, this position is not like exclusive, of course, and in a sense, we could say it's a bit passive, maybe. So we were working a lot on actually engaging other people in this place and kind of gathering this community around it, observing changes, kind of having our eyes and ears open. So sometimes this passivity, in a sense that we don't need to maybe produce something specific, but like be in the space and kind of watch for it. Not that it cannot watch for itself, but I mean, there is some kind of friction in the meeting place where the human enters, or the urban development enters or might enter. So yes, that this position of caretakers is quite important, and I think from that position we're also trying to invite a multitude of voices and perspective into this project. So we are seeing the voice and the experiences of neighbors and scientists and artists as of the same importance, sort of. So there is no leading narrative about the place.
It was very interesting because you talked about that you're kind of opposing this productivity that is imposed on our work. I mean, in culture, I think that it may seem that this pressure is not so big as in other lines of work that we do, but I guess that is just the same or even bigger, but it's even much more so that we're ourselves imposing it on us. Maybe Nina Gojić, would you agree with that? You were writing a bit about that also in the upcoming article for Maska. You were speaking about this imperative of can instead of must, that is predominantly kind of present in the ways that we work.
This topic of self-exploitation in culture is maybe also something that I have thought and written about on different occasions. Yeah, maybe in relation to the questions that you sent before, like for the preparation, and also about the issue of how we participate in creating the working conditions when we can. I think, yeah, maybe it's a good moment to give an example of how my engagement with the Dramaturgs Guild of Croatia is something that where I found the ways how to deal with this in a way that is both empowering and also produces concrete day-to-day changes in the context of work in culture. So I'm part of that board since 2019, and I coordinated the making of our first fair pay document, which was called the Handbook on Copyright, Fair Pay and Workers' Rights in the Field of Screenwriting, Dramaturgy and Performance Writing. And it's more than a proposal how to regulate working fees, but also it's a document that contains descriptions of the often invisible work done by dramaturgs and screenwriters and playwrights, together with a map of fields of struggle that we still have to be engaged in. This document was the first of its kind in the context of cultural labor in Croatia. And more cultural professions have published or started working on their respective fair pay documents in the meantime. So we received many examples of our colleagues who have managed to fight for better fees for their work. And it is self-rewarding in a way. But also, like, the Guild is dedicated to other activities that are focused on promoting the visibility of our work through educational programs, discursive events, and so on. And we try to be connected with other cultural professions when it comes to advocating for improvements in culture. So on various occasions, people have already recognized us as a sort of union, because there is no such thing for freelance cultural workers in Croatia, and we're not the only guild that functions like that, but unfortunately we are in the minority. So when it comes to this question of having to, I think that these principles of fairness and applying them in the working context where we can is a good way how to maybe practice things differently in a way. And of course, like my profession as a dramaturg really differs from one project to the next. So depending really on the space that I have, I can propose different ways to practice fairness, be it through advocating for transparency of the budget or respect for the time we have together and apart also. And also how different ways of horizontal work can be practiced without sacrificing division of labor and responsibility. So yeah, I don't know if this answers the question, but I think I think, yeah, in relation to that question, how we do things differently, I think that in culture we still have some agency that other professions that are more maybe that don't have that much liberty maybe to organize in a way that they find suitable. I think that this is still something where we have the possibility to practice something else.
Thank you. Maybe now a question for Tjaša. Maybe could you tell us a bit more, because you're working with you're working in the field of documentary or genre of documentary theater. And right now you're doing a series of lecture performances on the topic of sexual education. And in this work, a lot of interviews were conducted, and maybe you could explain how you conduct these interviews, that also the participants who have to, or who are explaining to you the topics that are for them a subject of, I mean, embarrassment, or a subject of ethically, they wouldn't like it to be public right away, or how do you deal with this relationality when you're conducting the interviews, and then how do you communicate how these themes are going to be performed or put on stage?
Yes, I mean, this project is based on, we are covering different topics, all somehow related to the notion of sexual pleasure as the fundamental sexual right in the frame of human rights. And we are then covering somehow different angles, different points of view, different topics that are connected to this. For example, painful intercourse and vaginismus, consent, unconventional sexual practices, women with disabilities and their sexuality and sexual pleasure, and so on. And we conducted, like all the lecture performances are based on interviews with experts in different fields, and also on interviews with women that shared their personal stories, experience problems connected to the topic of sexuality and sexual pleasure. And what is important with the interviews, the first thing somehow that is important for me and for all of us that are doing and we're doing the research, is that yes, that these interviews somehow they feel like sharing, and that they're an experience by themselves. And what is really important is that we audio record them, and this is then possible material for the lecture performances. But it's like the first thing that it's important is that we check with the person what is okay for them, if it's okay for them to use the recordings or if they want to, I don't know, use only some parts, if it's okay for them to use their voice, and so on. So, okay, this is a bit more like a technical part, but what is important for me is that each interview is somehow like individual, that when I was doing the interviews, or me together with the performers, and also some interviews only the performers did. But what was important was that you somehow feel we have some like questionnaires that we prepared, like with a lot of questions, and like maybe different questionnaires for different lecture performances according to the topic that we were tackling. But it was also always important to also have space to to be spontaneous, to go out of this questionnaire, and also to feel the person on the other side, like somehow what is okay for them to talk about, what is not okay for them to talk about. We also always emphasize that if they don't feel comfortable with some question, they don't have to answer it. and so on. So yeah, each interview is different because we really didn't like stick to the questionnaires so much. It was more like a conversation, and the questionnaires were just like how do you say, just something that you have and you can go back to if you need to. And what was also really important for me afterwards was that yeah, I wanted these people that gave us these interviews to somehow be informed about what we are doing with the material, and to be. It was my and our of the whole team intention to how to articulate this, to somehow present their stories in a way that would feel okay to them, that would be like that their stories would be presented somehow for us to be loyal to their stories somehow, and to present them with dignity and respect, and so it was really important for me to keep them informed during the process, what we are doing with the materials, what kind of strategies we are using, and so on. So and this was also it was also a bit stressful, for me to like really somehow make sure that I checked things, and and so on. I think this is I don't know, did I answer your question? But this is somehow this is what we are doing.
Yeah, thanks, because I think that of course it's important to establish and to fight for the conditions in which we want to work, and then when we are in the processes we still have to negotiate every relationship. I mean, it's not done if we maybe just have the enough we're paid enough and so on, but it's a constant negotiation inside these processes, which are of course vulnerable, and because you're dealing with these kind of questions. So thank you. And now maybe another question for Pola. You were speaking a bit before that you figured that your relationship with the modern human and the environment can also be considered a bit passive, or you articulated it like that. And maybe a question for me that is also relating to something that I was talking before, which is I mean, feminism and this prejudice of women being the passiver sex, and how this is maybe we shouldn't essentialize like this. And maybe my question would be, do you find relations in maybe feminist considerations and then ecological considerations? So maybe what's your stand on the ecofeminism in your practices?
Yeah, in that sense, we are. Maybe I would start with the notion of time and scale somehow, and I mean, I think also this figure of caretaker is definitely coming from the from ecofeminist considerations. But I wanted to also kind of broaden this specificity to the notions of time and of scale that we're dealing with. So kind of working with different kind of modalities of living, represented also by all kind of entities that we encounter in the wetland. We are kind of challenged by the different timescales, like different temporalities, and that also require us to kind of slow down in a sense, and to refer to that. So also this relationality that you were talking about. So we are not in our regular, let's say, time and scale. And I think just spending time at the swamp, even passively in a sense, or maybe it's like a passive on a facade, because we are working a lot with embodied practices. So we are using the body itself and different senses to also tune into the place, and to together to get to know it through our hearing, or through touch, not only through scientific knowledge, for example. So there is this notion of embodied knowledge that is also maybe kind of that might be undermining like the leading knowledge formats, like academic knowledge for sure, are the ones that were institutionalized and represented by for a very long time by a very privileged group, also men. So I think this kind of porosity of knowledge and looking towards our organisms, our kind of porous human as a porous structure that senses, that gathers information through sensing, or it's not even information, might be emotion, or other more like not quantitative but qualitative data, let's say, not data, I mean information. Definitely, I think stands in line with what different ecofeminist practices are doing as well. And I think also what I've been mentioning, in a sense, this putting the sign of equality between us and the non-human world, and being maybe a bit more humble in and seeing a human as an intertwined being, entangled in the world, and not isolated individual, basically. So I think these are the main. I mean, I could definitely go longer, but
Okay, thank you. Maybe it's really interesting when you're talking about different times and the relationship to time that changes through such practices. I think that in the productivist way of working, this is really an essential thing to be considering. So not only the ways how we collaborate, but also the paces through which we collaborate, and how we in the meantime also take care of each other, so that we don't collapse and burn out and so on. Okay. I don't know. Maybe I would now like to ask you maybe to pose some cross questions to each other if you want, or if you maybe heard something that you want to relate to. First, the three of you.
Maybe I would I don't think this is a question. I mean, maybe it would be a question like, what do you think about this? But I just got an association when you, Pia, when you mentioned negotiation and negotiating. I got an association that, in our process of making these lecture performances, one of the topics that we are dealing with, or we were dealing with, is also consent. And we were talking, and I was also thinking a lot about consent in the frame of relating in the process of, I don't know, of like doing the interviews, but at the same time also like collaborating with other members of the team. I think this topic was maybe the most present when we were working with the performers, because I found it somehow, I found it really important that to somehow to try to create an environment where people are somehow empowered to set boundaries, to also where like we were talking a lot about, I don't know, about the performative strategies, like from this perspective, like what to do on the stage, but at the same time also like how to work, and for me it was really somehow important to try to create space where people feel safe to set boundaries, and where consent is not somehow about like getting consent from someone or giving consent to someone, but more about attunement to other person, to other people, to somehow try to create space where we feel each other more, and where it's easier and safer to somehow to do somehow how what you feel is okay for you, and so on. And so yeah, this, I don't know, I hope this doesn't sound too much how to say abstract, but I found it really concrete actually in our process, and like with regard to the interviews, and also with regard to working with the performers and other co-creators. Yeah. So I wondered if this, I don't know how you are thinking about this, if this resonates, or am I being too abstract?
I can maybe relate. Yeah, that's fine with you, Nina. Yeah. I would say that it definitely resonates, and I guess I get what you're talking about, and I think in our practice, since it's so much rooted in the place and maybe even like defined by the place, I would say this relation with where we are, where we gather, like this particular wetland, and being there with other people. So, for example, where we conduct experimental walks, or when we have like those internal workshops with our collaborators from the field of science, humanities, and arts. Sorry, my dog is like getting crazy. Yeah. Like sometimes something, in a sense, not maybe that something magical happens, but I think our this being together in this specific situation is really defined by the place and how we relate to it. So we are sometimes, or like we were at the beginning of this internal workshop, we were maybe like introducing some set of values or ways of being together in the place that we might all like to follow. We're actually doing it together, not that it was imposed by us. So maybe there was some kind of a framework, but at the end, I feel like this attunement to the place was attuning us to each other in a sense. So we were, and then we could really feel that we are not isolated from the environment, from the world we are in, but we are always acting in relation to it. So so that was really influencing this, like establishing some kind of conversation or ways of being between us humans there, just always in this relation to the place where we were, and of course our like deep interest in the place, and yeah, sensitivity and all the things we were sharing probably. But still it was even kind of above, like the first time it was kind of above our expectations, even how it went, how maybe even tender this group came to be at the end, like towards each other in that space that we cared for. So care again as a framework.
Yeah, I can also maybe relate a bit to this idea of consent. I think it's a very interesting term that really became very popular a couple of years ago. And now we also talk about consent in other than sexual contexts. And I found the book Tomorrow Sex Will Be Good Again very interesting in this topic, if you've read it, by Catherine Angel, where she says about consent that the premise of good sex is that we don't always have to know what we want, and if and then that there's a certain pressure also that we have to know where our boundaries are, and how do we negotiate them then becomes a bit yeah, maybe it's not the definition of where pleasure comes from. And then now I really, when I think of it in other contexts, like in our cultural work, for example, or Paula, you were mentioning collaboration with other than human life forms. So what happens when we collaborate with life forms whose consent we cannot have or cannot know? Do we have their consent? And I think what you were mentioning about how we establish the agreements we make in the working context, I think this is super important, and I think it's like a day-to-day work. But I also wonder, like in experimental situations where, and I think our practices that we are talking about here are experimental, sometimes they don't go together, because experimenting means also testing boundaries and testing our borders. And so I'm really, yeah, I wonder what is the what is the actually I don't know what I what I want to say. I think it's a super important thing to include in our everyday talks about how we work, and also to know how does testing boundaries go together with setting them, and towards what and where. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe this is all very interesting because we are coming to some important questions which could already be certain methodologies that we are searching for in the frame of these talks and this project. But maybe one last question from me, and then maybe we can also turn to the audience if they have additional questions. I mean, this is for anybody who wants to reply, but do you, I mean, because we started this conversation in the framework of feminism, and I just wanted to maybe ask, I didn't still ask you if you still think that it is a useful field. I mean, if the methodologies that you're developing through your practice are feminist, and why or why not? I know it's a big question for the end of the conversation, but I don't know if anybody wants to have a take on it.
I can be brief, maybe. But for me, it really depends on who's asking. Because feminism is a very contested word also, and sometimes I don't want to be related to certain strains of feminism, like liberal feminism or TERF feminism or whatever kind of non-intersectional feminism that excludes any human and non-human life forms tends to be. So it really depends on the context. I think that the things I was talking about during this seminar, like the issues of fairness in work and fair pay principles and the validation of cultural labor as labor, are really feminist and socialist demands. So we shouldn't have to hide them as such, but also it really, for me, it's also a tactical question sometimes, like what do we get and what do we lose when we frame a certain practice as feminist or not. I primarily call my practice dramaturgic because I think that dramaturgic thinking is in the basis of everything that I do, whether I participate in the making of a performance as a dramaturg, or if I don't know, edit a journal or curate an event or participate in a research project, or I don't know, propose a knowledge exchange format. It's always, my dramaturgic practice is in the basis of it. And I very much like the idea of prefiguration, which is to say that that I like to be open to finding the form as the process happens, and finding what is it that we are gathered around during the process. So I think that this kind of openness is something that is it is both a feminist political method, but also it's something that maybe tactically I think that sometimes yes, sometimes maybe it makes more sense to leave certain words aside and then allow meanings to happen as we go. Oops.
I really like the last sentence that was said, and fully agree as well. What I would like to say is maybe that I consider feminism in that context as maybe useful for establishing a common ground, since so many different practices might relate to this. So even as we are talking here, right, like, I mean, we're doing, like, you're working in theater or dramaturgy, and we are working in a more an environment, let's say, ecosystem, and that helps. I mean, feminism here helps us to actually find links of other common practices. So I think, I mean, it's very simple maybe what I'm saying, but yeah, I would say that any common language we might be speaking is useful for us to connect, maybe. So I would see it in that way, and then, of course, I mean, being more specific and talking about intersectional feminism, because I also don't agree with all of them. So so it just helps also to connect practices that might be sometimes far away through each other to certain political and social projects that we might all care for and fight for, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I could say that, I mean, I really, that some traits of my practices or our practices right now are definitely can be called feminist, especially if I'm somehow following your how do you say, your what you wrote for this conversation, in a sense that that they are emphasizing the process and how we are working with each other. And because for me it's really important, and for me this is the only way that right now actually makes sense to work in the theater, is to somehow, for example, when we are doing a performance or a lecture performance, not to have it like in my mind from the beginning and then just execute it, but to actually to make it in the process, to experiment, to discover, for the example, which topic calls for which strategies, and to somehow try and figure it out and see what works, what doesn't work, and minding also the relations and the group dynamics in the process. And I feel that this is something that makes sense, and but it's, of course, I mean, for me it's also very important what is in the end, that what we do in the end, what kind of performance or lecture performance do we make. But I feel that all this process and how it is done is there, is present.
Okay, thank you very much, the three of you. Maybe if anybody from the participants, from other participants who are listening to us, has something to ask, now is the time. I think that it's the format is not like that we would like to continue for 3 hours here through Zoom and Facebook. So maybe we continue in some other circumstances. So I'd really like to thank you all, Nina, Tjaša, Pola, for participating today for this conversation. And hopefully I will talk to you and we will talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.